So how we saw AI playing a part into that was, we were doing all that manually.
Yeah.
And so that was a very time intensive process. Taking that data and inputting into our own type of calendar so that we can make our observations and make our decisions.
Hey guys, thank you so much for coming on and for making the time. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Gonzalo Sanchez. I've been in the hospitality industry for a little bit over 16 years, doing everything from, boutique hotels, mixed use condo hotels. And my background is really kind of blending operational efficiency, revenue management, and a lot of the technology projects that we implemented and worked on throughout all the properties in our portfolio.
Amazing. Okay. I guess for those listeners that don't know what revenue managers do, right? Like how do you think about revenue management, right? Like why is it important in the hospitality industry?
Well, revenue management is kind of the focal point as far as the profitability for any hotel operation. And what it really entails is just kind of, you know, when you're booking a hotel, obviously the rates. And so it's about rate optimization, distribution strategy, um, and getting effective systems so that hotels are on top of demand generators that are in the city and appropriately pricing their rooms so that along with all the expenses in the hotel, it's still a profitable business.
So every single hotel, right, has to do revenue management and kind of what are the factors they think about, right? Like so when I was working on it, right, it's a lot of how occupancy changes, right, how events kind of impact it. So if you can kind of walk us through that entire process.
Sure. So one of the biggest, the kind of basic level is obviously knowing what days, what months, what seasons certain hotels do that, what your rates are going to be. Because not every hotel, like independents have a lot more flexibility in changing their rates on the daily, the hourly, or whatever. And corporate, certain corporate hotels just have a straight bottom line or seasonal without as much manipulation. But the first factor while taking the rate into account is going to be, what is the competition pricing at? Because, well, I guess, let me rewind that. You know, Depending on what scale of your hotel, you might want to decide a bottom line rate. And then after that, you want to compare your asset to other similar types of properties. So when guests are booking, they're comparing obviously the competitor, like they're comparing your hotel, they're comparing other hotels. And then obviously what bases a lot of that you know, the deciding factor is going to be what the rate is. And so you could set your own rate, but looking at what the competitors are priced at is kind of the first step in establishing what you'll be priced at. You know, because there's hotels that are pretty much everywhere already. So there's already an established rate for different regions. So identify, like if you were building a new hotel, you'd want to make sure that the rates are competitive or, you know, are competitive with other hotels that are similar to yours or whatever the asset is. And then monitoring or making sure that the demand generators are understood. So weekday properties, weekend properties, different major holidays like, 4th of July, spring break. Certain cities have, massive concerts like Austin City Limits, Formula One goes every year, San Antonio has Fiesta. And so understanding all of those general demand generators and
Mm,
and and identifying what days those are on. And
mm,
then typically most cities have a convention center, at least most major cities have a convention center, and the convention centers usually make efforts to pull large amount of groups into the city. And so understanding when those groups are coming in will also play into account of what to expect the demand in the city is going to be on every individual day. That's kind of, and
Got it.
then you have your rates based off of those two factors, and people start booking and your occupancy will fill up. And the ideal world of, efficient revenue management is basically booking the lot like 100% every day at the very last possible, 11:59 p.m. or like 1:59 a.m. That's ideal and a steady upward growth. That means you've maximized your rate by keeping it where you need it to be and slowly grew it and increased it while your occupancy increased at the same time, and making sure that that ratio is as effective as possible to keep the highest rate. And so
Got it.
that's the ideal way to think about
Right. So all of the different, so you just outlined all the different factors, right, that go into deciding what the rate is, right? So like the first one you said was competitors' rates, and then you said like events, right? Event, and then the third thing you said was occupancy, right?
well, the events in the citywide, yeah, and then the occupancy based off of the amount of time out you are from the day of booking. Because after the day's done, that's it, that revenue's over. So the occupancy based on its increased growth, but along with how far out you are. You could keep it at a lower rate further out or a higher rate further out sometimes. And then as it gets closer, if you're not maintaining the occupancy that you want, you'd have to drop. Or as a day gets closer, you'll have to increase it because you're gaining that occupancy. So watching that flux on whether you're gaining occupancy or it's standing still
Hmm.
or staying still, that will depend on what rate to decide for that specific day.
Got it. Okay. And then you're saying that this kind of owner operated hotels, the kind of boutique independent hotels, right? You're able to do a lot more with changing rates than these big corporate hotels, right? So like, does that mean that if these corporate hotel chains, right, were to be a little bit more flexible with their rates, right, looking at demand indicators and events, right, like they would be making more revenue?
Yeah, they I believe so. But they do look at those. It's not like they're completely static.
Right.
But sometimes they'll be static for their base rate no matter what, especially some of the luxury hotels. Even if there's nothing going on in the city, it's like the slow period because of the how luxurious that hotel is and how nice that hotel is. They may have a floor that you know they end up with 10% occupancy in the hotel. Whereas, if they were more independent or more proactive and willing to go lower, they would they'd get a higher occupancy. But, there's also a balance with that in maintaining an ADR and a RevPAR. So if you
Yeah.
go too low, although you'll get the occupancy, there's the flip side of that is if you had the less occupancy and kept the higher rate, you may have the same revenue for both properties, but one property has less wear and tear, less labor cost, and everything like that.
And you
But yeah,
mentioned,
typically the corporate flags are not as they don't maneuver as much as some of the independents, but they're not completely static.
oh, that's interesting. And just so you mentioned two things, just so for the people that aren't familiar, right? What is RevPAR and what is ADR?
Sorry. So
No worries.
ADR is the average daily rate. So taking all your rooms in the hotel that were sold for that day and whatever taking the revenue that you made for that day, dividing that, and you'll get what your average daily rate is. And so that's on an active basis that's fluctuating with how many rooms you sold at what rate, and what your occupancy is at that time, that gives you what your average daily rate is. And you'll finalize it at the end of the day, but throughout the process of getting to that day, you'll see it fluctuate. And then RevPAR stands for revenue per available room, which is basically occupancy times ADR. So whatever your average daily rate was multiplied by your occupancy, that gives you what your RevPAR was, which is what your revenue was for available room.
So a few questions, and thank you for explaining that. Right, so these luxury hotels that like stay at a specific price, regardless of external factors, right? What are they? I guess why do they do that? Right? Is it just kind of like, hey, we want a specific client that comes, right? Are they optimizing for something else?
For the corporate
Yeah, so like these luxury hotels that you
or
were
the luxury
saying,
hotels?
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like,
For
I guess what's the thought process, right, behind keeping staying at 10% occupancy, right? But then not really changing your
It
rates,
would be
right? Is it
maintaining the clientele.
okay?
I believe that would be the primary. There's probably a couple other factors, but I believe, they want to maintain that standard, certain luxury properties,
Yeah,
where they want to attract a certain specific clientele that, that goes along with some of these luxury hotels that have their food and beverage. And, their food and beverage might be a really high class restaurant
right.
that if they go too low and get the clientele, that clientele will complain on, oh, well, your restaurant's too expensive or something like that. And you know, yeah, I believe that's the main factor.
Interesting. Okay. So then, right. So when you were in charge of this
And
system,
sorry, just
yeah,
real quick, and
yeah,
there's
no
also,
worries.
not just for the luxury, but for some of the corporate, there are brand like rates, period, that, are just come from the corporate offices that your
Yeah,
hotel needs to sell at this rate, and like that's it. Whether it's that they've feel like they've done maybe their analytics or their research on what type of property theirs is, even if it's not like a super luxury, but they have it's just their standards, you know,
yeah.
the standards for the guest clientele, the kind of standard that the hotel needs to maintain, and what type of clientele are found at that standard, and that can fluctuate. So it's not just luxury. Mid levels can be static, or can be static as well.
Interesting. Okay. So then, so it seems like there's this interplay, right, between, especially in hospitality, right, between providing an experience that the guests want, right, and like maximizing revenue. So when you were working at Riverwalk Plaza and Austin Condo Hotel, what metrics were you trying to optimize?
Honestly, it was just making sure that, like, what we initially spoke about on how you get that initial rate,
Yeah.
we would, get that rate and then monitor it daily, see how much, it increased from the day before to the next day, et cetera, et cetera. If it wasn't moving fast enough for us to feel, the goal is to try and sell out every day,
Yeah, got it. Okay.
but we don't want to go down to $30 rooms, which the hotel will
Yeah.
sell out. So there's a balance
Right.
on there. But the metric is just trying to maximize by seeing, you know, the speed of the occupancy within, I guess within the range of what the competitors are doing.
Got
Occasionally,
it. Okay.
even with our comp set, we go a little bit lower than what our comp set was out of all our comp set hotels and steal that kind of occupancy market share. But there's a delicate balance in going too low.
Yeah.
If you risk going too low, how we were talking about the clientele, the type of clientele changes. Typically, clientele that's paying less than what your hotel is kind of normally getting, typically they complain more about issues, um, within their stay is something that, we've noticed over our years operating our assets. So yeah,
Interesting. Okay. So right, you're not trying to optimize occupancy, right? Because that's easy. You just drop
that's
the
not, yeah,
rate, right?
exactly. That's not
Yeah.
the sole factor.
And
Like
it's
you could
not even
occupied
yeah.
occupancy, yeah. Make your rates $30 and the whole hotel will fill out.
God.
So
So
you're trying to, you have these the metrics um are also identified on what's called a star report,
okay. Yeah.
which is from the company CoStar, and it's probably the industry leading report on measuring revenues, your success with revenue and revenue management,
Interesting. Okay.
because it takes the data from not just your hotel, but all the hotels that you have in your comp set, and pretty much all the hotels. And so you have indexes within that report that basically, if your index is 100, then you pretty much match what your market or what the competitive set did. If it was lower than 100, you didn't, your competitors outperformed you. If it's higher than 100, then you outperformed your competitors. And the most important metric is RevPAR.
Right. Yeah.
The monitoring of the RevPAR index on these star reports that come out weekly and monthly
Yeah.
is, even though it's kind of already in hindsight, that
Yeah.
gives you the idea of where you should be, because you want to be trying perform as or better than your comp set.
Interesting. Okay. So RevPAR you want to be as RevPAR is kind of
The
the
main
North
focus
Star
is
metric.
always
Yeah.
RevPAR, not occupancy.
Interesting.
But
Got it.
occupancy, in so occupancies has a greater impact during the slower times. But on these high demand jet days, for us, one of our the Riverwalk Plaza was the weekends. We want to have the higher rate. Like our focus is more ADR focused, because
Interesting. Okay.
the occupancy is going to come no matter what. So we wanted to maintain that rate, or Austin city limits, something like that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the metric is rough.
Interesting. Got it. Okay. So I want to talk a little more. I want to talk. I'm going to dive a little bit into how you kind of make those decisions, and then kind of zoom back out, and then talk about overall operations, right? Because I think you said you've been working in hospitality for over a decade now, but like specifically with revenue management, how are you making those decisions? Where you're getting the data from, right? Like what are you taking a look at?
So every property has what's called a PMS, stands for property management system. And that property management system is typically like the heart and soul of what runs the operation,
Yeah.
whether it's checking someone in, designating rooms to housekeeping, putting in maintenance requests, and all those functions, depending on the property management system, but all those functions have layers of analytics and data, because it's going through the entire like everything that's happening in the hotel is recorded within this software.
Hmm.
And that includes, you know, the occupancy, the rate, um, how many rooms are actually sold, how many rooms are blocked. And so the data we would use is, how much revenue do we have for that day? How much occupancy do we have for that day? What's our ADR for that day? And what rate are we set for that day? And all that data is within the system. So extracting it to analyze was what we used to make our decisions. So, you know, some uh, you know, we would extract that data and put it on this calendar that had all that information.
Hmm.
And then update that calendar on a regular basis, and based on what we see the changes are in that calendar would influence and make us change our.
Got it. Okay. And I guess in that process, right, from raw data to actually making a decision, I guess where did you see kind of AI playing a role in that?
So that was a manual process for us initially. And, there are other programs that kind of automatically make the rate changes for you that exist in the market. We would just monitor that on the spreadsheet, and make our changes from there. So how we saw AI playing a part into that was, we were doing all that manually.
Yeah.
And so that was a very time intensive process. Taking that data and inputting into our own type of calendar so that we can make our observations and make our decisions based off of that data. And then we'd have to go back into the system and really change the rate and just go back and forth on like a daily basis. How we thought AI could play a part into that was the automation of that process, the automation of the extracting the data from the software from the
Yeah.
system and inputting it into a new system and a new calendar that is true live data without human error, because that's also plays a factor. Doing it manually, 5% human error and putting in the
Right.
wrong data or something like that, but having real time data, current and historical data, because that's another factor, is looking at your history. I mean, if you're monitoring it daily, you know that, but occasionally on days that are more stagnant, you could see looking at historical plays a part in the rate decision. But having all that data just extracted and inputted was one, just changes the whole game in the position by just like the labor intensiveness. And then the next step would be, you know, changing the rates, either changing the rates from the system, the new system right then and there. That saves time instead of having to go to the other system and input the rates manually, which is another, there are times that a rate would be inputted wrong, even though it was correct on the calendar.
Really?
You know,
Eh,
just, just slips when you're changing, you know, 40 rates a day or something like that. Occasionally that would happen, but the AI automation and making sure that doesn't happen. But then taking all the same factors that we just spoke about on how the decisions were being made, and then having AI recommend rates and or change rates automatically so that there's no slip on, relying on someone to do that. Another factor in kind of helping with the rate decisions I forgot to mention is looking at prior years of
Yeah.
the same time frame. And so we thought AI could compile all the information from the prior years as well, along with how we would change rates without knowing that data just right now. And
Mm.
between those two functions, really optimize the rate changes and do it consistently without having to wait till someone does it. Waiting 20 every day, 24 hours, maybe waiting every 15 minutes and then seeing a change and it being automatic.
Oh, so that's interesting. So there's kind of three main buckets, right, to where you saw AI being used. The first one is just kind of no manual work, right? So kind of removing that. And, aside from the time saving thing, I think an interesting thing you brought up was that it's also like an accuracy thing too, right? So like number one, you save time, and then also it sounds like, you do leave money on the table, right? Like if something happens, right? Like, suppose rooms are getting booked up, right? And you change the rate and then you actually change it to the wrong thing, right? You actually lose money, right? Where you could have been making money. And then the third thing, right? So saving time, reducing error, and then interesting, it's also you're thinking about how to take all of the data, right, that we've kind of automated, right, and allow it to start using historical data to make kind of rate changes. So I guess if you were to put a human right in this process, where would you put him? Would you keep him at the would you keep them at the decision making point and kind of provide recommendations, or how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, it's just an oversight so that, some data or feeling that, there's also intuition in the rate. Like you have a hunch, and sometimes that that helps. For example, I'll give you an example for me on that would be something we have something called Valero Bowl here in San Antonio, which
Yeah.
is a big college a championship, a bowl, but those colleges that are decided, not too far out from the date of it, and you won't know who it is until it's actually decided. But, you could have a hunch and like, oh, I think this team's going to win, blah, blah, blah. And then keep your rate for that team because you know that they're more willing to travel or something. But
Right.
with the AI sophistication and speed, when that's decided and bookings start to come, that would be changed immediately. So that wouldn't even necessarily be, a factor. Where it would put a human would just be on oversight of the system, the rate set, and then, if the AI is good enough, you know, the as it has, you know, evolved enough, sometimes you just trust the AI,
Mhm.
you know, but you're still the only human component for it would just be kind of the oversight.
Interesting. Got it. So the decisions would still kind of be mostly made by, the yes or the no would be done by the human, but the actual compiling, like looking at trends and everything and making the recommendations, right? That would kind of be an AI system.
Well, I can see both because I think ideally you want the system to actually to make the change
Oh,
because
interesting.
if
Okay.
if the person, the human, is the one, that's actually confirming, now you're putting, you're delaying that process. Now you're still relying on someone that needs to make that decision and make that change or approve that change. If something happens to someone or whatever, it might not be done fast enough. And the speed of the rate change is critical to maximizing, the revenue.
Interesting. Got it. Okay.
So I think it would just be the AI could make the change and the human is notified.
Right.
And then if there's something that looks off or is like, hey, wait a second, or, or I disagree, it always can be modified by by the manager.
Interesting. Okay. So that's kind of, revenue management. But
Hmm.
like as somebody that's been working in hospitality for over 10 years, right, and has been working in operations, right, where do you see like a similar type of system being used?
Where AI can
Yeah.
contribute. I mean, I think it can contribute in almost every fashion or every facet. The one thing that comes to mind is accounting,
Interesting.
helping with
Okay.
the auditing process. There's lots of data that our accounting managers and our night auditors go through, called a bucket check that that every hotel does at the end of the shift, at the end of the night, and that's another time intensive task, just reviewing and identifying and making sure things match, etc. But I think that time process can be reduced significantly with AI, and maybe not done automatically because the whole point of the audit is for having someone to verify, but
Right.
that still takes a lot of work to do. And then that audit goes to the accounting, which is another aspect. So that's like the first thing that comes to mind. Today, what a lot of hotels are already doing are obviously the chatbots and the virtual assistants. That
Yeah.
reduces the front desk part, like, the labor that they have to use at the front desk for answering calls or dealing with guests, simple questions, and that would reduce labor costs. At that point, maintenance, I could see for maintenance, I haven't really thought about it, but what I could see it doing is, when requests are input into the system, I think, you know, when a maintenance request can be input into the system, that goes out to the maintenance team. The maintenance team goes up, like fixes the item or whatever it is, inputs that into the system, and then that's kind of these work orders are typically used, and it's typically from the property management system. Now, the time it takes for a maintenance employee to go fix a problem, those analytics, some property management systems have it so you could print all that out, but I think, an AI could help analyze some of that information, looking at rooms that have similar maintenance issues that are seeming to be more repetitive, and provide recommendations and automatically input preventive maintenance issues, saying like, based on how often this is being changed, this needs to happen. I think AI could help with that computation and data to help with preventive maintenance.
Interesting.
All
I didn't
all
even
these
think about that.
factors,
Yeah.
AI can just, obviously there'll be one person overseeing all these different
Yeah.
factors, but the computation and analyzing can be done much more efficiently and quickly through AI, and
Yeah.
it can affect almost every aspect of the hospitality business I could see.
Interesting. So I guess what you're saying is like if you're able to kind of automate all of these things, right, provide analytics, you actually allow people to focus on the people side of the house, right?
You focus on guest experience, guest service, but by all this time being taken out, and you also eliminate errors.
Yeah. That's it. I didn't even think about that, but especially for like an independent hotel, right? Like just even small changes in room rates, right, seem to
Right.
make a big impact.
Yeah.
And then just as we're coming to a close here, right? So you used to be like an architect, right?
Correct.
You are an architect.
Well, I have my architecture degree. There's a big difference. I have my master's in architecture, and for a while I was working for like a firm doing design work, doing independent design work.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference with being an architect and being a licensed architect, and
Oh, okay.
what I did.
I guess how do you think that, going to architecture school, like working as a designer, right? How do you think that impacts, kind of how you think about operations, right? Or, your previous roles doing revenue management.
So it's a great question. Really, architecture is how I've always defined architecture is just problem solving. And your problem is, creating a building or a space for a variety of purposes. A home, a medical office, hospital, you know, a workshop, and so architects, you're one problem solving and learning the technicalities of how these things are built and how to draw it out so that they're built correctly. But, in architecture school, one of the biggest lessons that one of my professors used to, teach us is, the best, you have to know the business to design for that person. You have to, at least on a base level,
Right.
understand what the needs of the occupant are to design the perfect space for them. But this applies more for really awesome architects, right? Not so much cut and paste, box, like, figure it out. But true architects will, you have to learn that. You have to put yourself in, to design a hospital is an example that's very
Mm.
complex. Learning what the doctors need to do, how much space they need, what needs to be in that space, how do the nurses interact with that, where's their stations, what do they need to do, how's the engineering in a facility like this. And so you have to put all that together in a way that makes sense for them and works
Mm.
for them. Okay, you design a hospital, now you have to design, I'm not sure, like let's just say a workshop, and what is the workshop needs going to be? And so you need to kind of learn about, you know, let's say it was an automotive workshop. You need to learn a little bit about what a mechanic is or does. and how
Hmm.
they utilize their space. And every time you're doing this, you have to learn about the needs of the design.
Hmm.
And so coming into the hospitality aspect, I had no experience in hospitality. But what architecture, how it influenced me, it helped. I didn't, which being not in the hospitality industry previous,
Hmm.
I didn't have any preconceived notions of what how it should be.
Hmm.
And so even with revenue management, which was one of my first, yeah, like coming in the first jobs, basically, I did some design work initially for the hotel, but then went into revenue management. It was completely open to me. I didn't know what industry standards were, had to learn a little bit about what they are, but it gave me an opportunity to really see what are the problems, what needs to happen, and then how do we need to do that.
Hmm.
And so created the systems in place that was the basis to how we do our revenue management was a very important step and helped me understand you know the entire position, the entire like area of revenue management. And then same with front desk, it allowed me to ask the question, why do we do it that way? Well, this is what they do in every hotel. Well, just
Hmm.
tell me why. And then obviously they're done that way for typically good reasons, but that questioning from coming from a lack of understanding, but a nature of trying to problem solve, was very beneficial for us.
Wow. Well, I'm glad that you got that architecture degree then, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, those are all the questions that I had. Thank you so much for coming on, Gonzo.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.